She bought a first-class ticket with a stolen card. That's what they shouted across the terminal. No proof, no hesitation. Just a public accusation hurled at a well-dressed black woman moments before they shoved her against a wall and dragged her away in front of dozens of silent onlookers. No one asked questions. No one stopped them. A baton tapped threateningly against a gloved palm. A loudspeaker crackled with lies. Passenger is resisting. Possible security threat. In reality, she said one sentence, "This seat is mine." But her voice didn't matter. Not to them. They didn't see a doctor. They didn't see a leader. They saw her skin, and that was enough to rewrite the truth. Or so they thought. What happens next turns this entire terminal upside down. You won't see it coming, but she planned for this moment. And when the real story comes to light, it won't just expose the people who tried to erase her. It will take down everything they hide behind. Before we unravel it all, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever witnessed someone being silenced for simply standing where they belonged? Hit like, subscribe, and stay with us. Because this story, this one breaks the system. Chicago O'Hare International buzzed like a living organism. Loudspeaker announcements echoed across the vaulted ceiling, strollers squeaked, wheels clicked against the polished floors, and coffee-fueled travelers shuffled in half-wakefulness through checkpoint lines. Dr. Niele Rhodes rolled her carry-on toward the TSA security checkpoint, coat buttoned tight against the winter air still clinging to the terminal's entrance. Her travel attire was sleek and utilitarian. Charcoal trench coat, matte black boots, navy blue medical scrubs visible at the collar. Her hair, pulled into long, tidy locks, was wrapped in a silk scarf. The laminated badge on her collar shimmered beneath the LED lights. Dr. Niele Rhodes, MD, Chief Surgical Officer, Western Hill Medical Center. She was used to silence in lines like these, used to being the anomaly in spaces like this. As she stepped into the full-body scanner, the machine lit up green. No alerts, no issues. She exhaled, ready to move on. But the agent in front of her raised a hand, barring her way. "Ma'am, I need to check your hair." Niele blinked, her tone even. "Excuse me." The TSA agent, a lean white man with pale stubble and too much confidence, smiled without warmth. "Routine inspection. Just need to make sure there's nothing tucked away under all that." His eyes flicked toward her locks. Niele stared at him, the air between them still. "Your scanner didn't beep. You let the man before me go through without this." "Protocols vary," he replied with a shrug. "We got discretion." "You didn't check the white woman ahead of me either." His grin widened, almost daring her. "You can refuse, of course. But then we escalate." She didn't flinch. "Then bring a female officer. And keep your hands to yourself." He called over a female colleague, young, clearly uncomfortable, hands already trembling as she patted Niele's head. She didn't find anything. Of course not. The agent behind her leaned in and whispered, "All clear, huh? Shame." As Niele reached for her belongings, she heard a shutter click. She turned. One of the security guards behind the checkpoint had raised his phone, camera still in hand. He was laughing with another guard, pointing at the photo. "Yo, this Dr. Rhodes?" he asked the other, snorting. "Since when do they hand out MDs in Crenshaw?" The second guard added, "More like Dr. Dre." Laughter. Then a third guard printed the image and scribbled Dr. Who on it with a red Sharpie. Niele said nothing. Her hand clenched the handle of her bag so tightly the leather creaked. She walked slowly, deliberately, refusing to let them see her flinch. As she entered the terminal, her reflection in a pane of dark glass stared back, tired, restrained, simmering. She found her gate and sat in a quiet corner, legs crossed, eyes focused not on her phone or the flight board, but on the weight of silence that followed her here. She had been through this before, in boardrooms, at funding pitches, even in hospitals she helped build. But something about this incident was colder, more personal. They didn't just question her competence, they denied her humanity. And they did it while laughing. Inside the TSA break room, the photo of her badge was already pinned to a corkboard next to a drawing of a gorilla wearing a stethoscope. One of the guards added a caption, Next flight surgeon? The woman officer who had done the pat-down hesitated before walking out. She didn't say anything, but she didn't stop them either. Back at the terminal, Niall pulled out her phone, not to scroll, but to open her notes. O'Hare TSA checkpoint C7:42 a.m. Racially targeted hair search. Unauthorized photo taken of ID badge. Humiliation in front of personnel and passengers. No policy violation cited. Agent refused to explain why white passengers weren't searched. She typed each sentence with care, precision, surgical, even. It was how she operated in the OR, and it was how she would fight here. This wasn't new. She just never documented it this thoroughly. Her eyes scanned the lounge, travelers laughing, sipping overpriced lattes, flipping through tabloids filled with headlines about scandals and celebrities. She wondered if anyone noticed what had just happened. If anyone would have spoken up. Probably not. Especially not here. She turned her gaze inward, reminding herself why she was traveling in the first place. A conference in Seattle. A panel on racial bias in healthcare leadership. The irony was so thick it hurt. Her eyes landed on the terminal window. Her stomach turned. She had already passed the scanner, already been patted down, already been humiliated in front of everyone. Is there a reason? She asked, keeping her tone level, despite the alarm that began flickering in her gut. It's random, he said, already gesturing toward a door labeled Private Screening 04. She didn't move right away, and the younger agent shifted on his feet. Ma'am, please, he said, quieter, almost apologetic. Niall glanced around. No one stopped, no one stared. The crowd moved like a river, unaware or unwilling. She turned and followed. The room was small, white, sterile, and far too quiet. The door shut behind her with a hiss, and she suddenly felt the full weight of being enclosed. We'll need you to remove your coat, your boots, and any innerwear that could conceal electronics, the lead agent announced, snapping on a fresh pair of gloves like he was preparing for a crime scene. Excuse me, she said, voice firmer. I already passed inspection. This isn't standard. This is protocol for elevated risk profiles, he responded, avoiding eye contact. You fit that profile? Based on what? My skin? My braids, she shot back, her voice rising but still controlled. The man's gaze flicked toward the door, as if daring her to escalate. You can cooperate, he said, stepping closer, or we can detain you under Federal Regulation 741. I'd like to call legal counsel, she said, pulling her phone halfway from her pocket. He slapped it from her hand. Not in this zone. The phone hit the floor with a clatter. This is a controlled area. You don't have rights in here. She stared at him, stunned. That's not how the law works. He stepped forward and grabbed her tote bag, yanking it from her shoulder with one hand and tossing it carelessly to the corner of the room. It is today. The younger officer flinched but said nothing. Niall took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She had faced down dying patients, impossible surgeries, hostile review boards. She would not be reduced to shaking in a government closet by two men who saw her as less than. You don't get to strip search me for existing, she said through clenched teeth. The older agent rolled his eyes. Lady, you're flying alone, no escort, high-value ticket. And you didn't respond well to a previous query. That makes you a red flag. I'm a doctor, she hissed. Not a threat. You're whatever I say you are until I'm told otherwise, he replied. The next 20 minutes passed like a slow, burning nightmare. She removed her coat, her boots, her scarf. They scanned each item twice, asking her to open the lining of her scarf to check for signal-blocking material. They asked invasive questions. Had she traveled to the Middle East recently? Had she spoken foreign languages at the gate? Had she ever been radicalized? She answered with minimal words, her voice stripped down to its bones. The younger agent kept avoiding her eyes. The older one never blinked. When she requested a female officer to monitor her disrobing, he chuckled and said, "This isn't about modesty, it's about safety." It wasn't, and she knew it. When they were done, they returned nothing with care. Her tote bag had been tossed, her phone buried under it, screen cracked. Her scarf was wrinkled, her boots scuffed. She dressed again in silence. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from pressure, internal, volcanic. As she buttoned her coat, the older agent leaned in one last time. "Next time," he said, "maybe try flying, coach." Niall stared at him, her voice flat. "Next time, maybe try treating people like humans." She stepped out of the room and back into the terminal. The contrast was jarring. Outside, the world continued. A child squealed with laughter near a coffee stand. A businessman argued with someone over Bluetooth. Flight announcements droned overhead. No one knew. No one saw. But inside her, something had ruptured. Her dignity wasn't just bruised. It had been handled, grabbed, stripped, and thrown across the floor. She walked to a quiet alcove, pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, and took a photo of her cracked screen. Then she opened her notes and added, 7:58 a.m. private screening 04. Unlawful detainment. No warrant, no female officer present. As she neared the final boarding checkpoint, she was intercepted again. This time by a uniformed security supervisor leaning lazily against a podium, chewing gum like he had nowhere more important to be. "Hey," he called out, eyes dragging over her like a scanner. "They finally let you out the penalty box." She ignored the bait and reached for her ID to confirm her gait. Before she could speak, he raised an eyebrow and barked loudly enough to draw attention. "You got a medical badge on that thing?" She froze for a beat. "Yes," she said. "I'm Dr. Rhodes, traveling for a medical summit." He smirked. "Doctor, huh? What kind? Which doctor?" Laughter erupted from a nearby cluster of ground staff. Another man in a reflective vest shook his head and muttered just loud enough, "Bet it's honorary." YouTube University strikes again. A female staffer with a headset covering one ear stepped forward, fake concern lacing her voice. "What do you specialize in, Doc? Palm readings or exorcisms?" The group snickered. Niall didn't blink. "I specialize in trauma reconstruction," she said coldly. "I've rebuilt the spines of soldiers torn apart by IEDs." "What do you specialize in? Badge scanning." The smirks faltered, but only slightly. The woman with the headset took out her phone, pretending to check flight manifests, but instead subtly angled the lens toward Niall and snapped a photo. "Smile for the crew group chat," she said under her breath, and the guard beside her chuckled. "We gotta let M know what confidence without credentials looks like." Another staff member piped up. "Bet she carries a scalpel in that fancy bag, just in case someone needs an emergency curse lifted." The mocking wasn't just public, it was orchestrated, escalating. Nearby passengers, already boarding, paused to look. One young man in a hoodie raised his phone slightly, not obviously recording, but clearly intrigued. A middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, both shaking their heads, as if Niall had brought this spectacle upon herself by simply existing too boldly in their space. "Enough," Niall said, her voice calm but edged with steel, the kind honed through years in operating rooms where life depended on clarity. "You've made your point. You don't believe I belong here. But when you're done laughing, I suggest you Google the name on this badge." She held it up deliberately. "It'll take you less than a minute to learn that I not only run one of the most advanced surgical departments in the country, but I also lecture on systemic bias in healthcare, bias you're currently demonstrating with textbook precision." Silence clung for a half-second too long before the security guard snorted. "Right. And I'm president of NASA." He looked to the others and added, "Let's get her a telescope. Maybe she'll find credibility in the stars." The woman with the headset giggled and turned away. The boarding door opened. The line of passengers began to trickle forward again. A flight attendant from the boarding gate, younger than the rest, gave Niall an uncertain look as if she knew this was wrong, but didn't have the rank or courage to stop it. Niall didn't wait for permission. She walked forward and scanned her boarding pass. The beep echoed louder than it should have, like a final word in a dead room. As she walked down the jet bridge, she could still hear one of them behind her saying, "Hope the witch doctor packed her cauldron in cargo." She reached her seat, 2A, first class, window side. The leather felt colder now, the ambient luxury a thin veil over everything she just endured. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. "Dr. Rhodes," he said, "we've had a flag from Central Security regarding your boarding credentials. Please come with us for a quick clarification." Her jaw flexed. She had just opened her email with full credentials, hospital certifications, and her executive appointment letter attached in clear, indisputable print. "Clarification for what exactly?" she asked, keeping her voice cool. "Your identification and booking status raised some discrepancies," the officer answered, while the other stood behind him, arms folded, gaze unreadable. "Just a few minutes, that's all." Niel knew what this was. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't clarification. It was punishment for speaking too well, dressing too sharp, existing too confidently. Still, she stood, gathered her bag, and walked down the narrow aisle as murmurs rippled behind her. The passengers' eyes tracked her movement, some out of curiosity, others out of relief that it wasn't them. She was led through a side exit tunnel not used for regular passenger flow, then into an auxiliary corridor behind the gate area. At the end of it, a single unmarked door opened into a small, dimly lit room with no windows and no visible surveillance equipment. One chair, one table, one glaring overhead light. "Please have a seat," the second officer said, closing the door behind her with a soft but final click. She sat, back straight, gaze unblinking. The first officer placed a file folder on the table and opened it with performative precision, though the pages inside were blank. It was theater. "Dr. Rhodes," he began, his tone shifting from neutral to surgical. "Can you confirm that you purchased this ticket yourself?" She nodded once. "Yes." He tapped the edge of the folder. "And what form of payment was used?" "Personal business card, linked to my corporate account," she replied. "And who authorized the transaction?" "Me. I'm the executive account holder." "Interesting," he said, leaning back, fingers steepled. "Because we have no record of a Dr. Niel Rhodes linked to any account under Western Hill." "You're looking at the wrong system," she replied flatly. "Try cross-referencing the hospital's federal procurement network." "We don't have access to that," he said. "Then maybe this conversation is over," she returned. He ignored the comment and shifted tactics. "Have you ever traveled under an alias?" "No." "Has your ID ever been flagged for possible fraud?" "Never." "Are you aware that impersonating a medical professional is a federal offense?" "Yes," she said, "and accusing one without evidence is reckless." The man's lips twitched with irritation. The second officer stepped in, flipping through nothing on a blank tablet. "Why are there no domestic flight logs under your name in the past 60 days? "Because I've been in Europe overseeing a surgical conference," she said. "You can check my passport stamps and the official itinerary from the International Medical Council." "Do you have that with you?" "No, but you can ask Google." Her sarcasm was razor sharp, but her tone remained steady. It was her armor. The first officer stood, walked toward the wall-mounted intercom panel, and pressed a button. His voice, calm and crisp, echoed through the terminal's internal speaker system. "Attention personnel. Potential identity breach under review. Subject currently in holding. Possible resistance to protocol." The words slammed through her like cold water. She stared at the man, fury building beneath her skin, not because she was afraid, but because she knew the language wasn't for staff. It was for them, for the crowd, for the people already watching. It was code for, "She's dangerous. She doesn't belong. Treat her as a threat." The lie was now official. It was written into the system. Her silence, her refusal to bow, had now been reframed as resistance. The officer turned back and gave her a casual shrug. "Just following escalation protocol. You understand?" "No," she said, her voice now sharp. "What I understand is that you've used the full machinery of public humiliation to create a narrative. And now you'll hide behind forms and code names to cover your tracks." He smirked, unbothered. "You still think you're in control?" Niel stood slowly, her hand steady, her gaze like steel. "I know I am." The second officer blocked the door. "We're not done yet." Two more uniformed guards waited outside, one gripping a baton loosely in his right hand like it was an extension of his authority, the other holding a radio that buzzed with coded chatter. "Let's go," the one with the baton said, without a greeting, a warning, or an ounce of civility. Niel stepped out of the holding room, back into the terminal's harsh fluorescence, and immediately felt a change. People were watching. A small crowd had gathered along the cordoned path between the gate entrance and the customer service desk. Their eyes tracked her every movement. Some whispered. Some openly stared. The intercom flared to life again, this time with more venom. Attention all gate staff, please be advised. Passenger in question has been flagged for possible ticket fraud involving stolen corporate credit accounts. Situation is being addressed by airport security. Nielle's breath halted for a split second. She turned to the officer nearest her. You have no basis to say that. That's a blatant lie. The officer didn't answer. He kept walking. She followed, her posture straight, her mind racing. They weren't just questioning her now. They were publicly branding her. Loud enough for the passengers to hear. Loud enough to seed doubt, spread suspicion, and cast her as an outcast before she could speak a single word. A woman clutching a designer tote pressed herself closer to her husband, as if proximity to Nielle would stain her seat. A man in business casual stepped aside, muttering, should have known, just under his breath, but not low enough to escape her ears. The smear had worked, but they weren't done. This is outrageous, Nielle said aloud, turning to address one of the terminal supervisors stationed near a control kiosk. I demand to speak to a federal agent. Someone outside of this chain of abuse. The supervisor didn't look up. He pressed a button on his radio and replied, We're escalating now. Subject is resisting reassignment. The Baton officer turned sharply. I suggest you keep your voice down. And I suggest you provide evidence before slandering someone in public, she snapped back. The officer stepped in close, the rubber of his baton tapping slowly against his gloved hand. We've got enough right here, he said, gesturing vaguely to a tablet another guard was holding. Digital discrepancies in your reservation. Suspicious patterns. Behavioral markers. You name it. That's not proof, she said, raising her voice now, not from panic, but from the sheer weight of injustice rising in her chest. That's a justification for a narrative you already wrote. Ma'am, the officer said sharply, stepping forward and placing one hand on her shoulder with mock restraint. If you don't calm down, we'll have no choice but to detain you for obstruction. Then do it, she said, brushing his hand off. Let's make it official. That was the final cue. The guard with the baton didn't hesitate. He stepped behind her, shoved her hard toward a wall near the jet bridge's side, and hissed, You think we're bluffing? One more word, and you'll be in a holding cell for the rest of the day. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Her tote dropped to the ground, papers and devices tumbling out. The sound it made echoed through the terminal like a gunshot. The moment froze. Dozens of passengers now stopped and stared openly, no longer feigning disinterest. A child clutched their mother's leg. A man pulled out his phone and began recording quietly behind his carry-on bag. She's resisting again, the officer called over his shoulder, louder than necessary. Possible hostile intent. Nielle struggled to regain her breath, then stood upright, face flushed but controlled. You've just assaulted me in front of 50 witnesses, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And if you think I won't hold this airport accountable, you're even more incompetent than you look. The officer didn't respond this time. He simply stepped back, baton still in hand, daring her to say another word. But the damage had already been done, not to her, but to them. Because now people were starting to look differently. The woman with the tote frowned. The businessman from earlier shifted uncomfortably. The camera in the corner blinked red. She pulled out her cracked phone and dialed the hospital's legal liaison. The line rang once, then cut. She tried again. No signal. She checked her screen, 4 bars gone. No service, blinking like an insult. She stood and walked toward the nearest help desk. I need access to the airport's Wi-Fi, she said, keeping her voice calm, though her eyes screamed war. The man behind the counter, a balding supervisor with lanyards and superiority layered over a cheap smile, glanced at her ID badge and let out a thin laugh. Wi-Fi's reserved for premium lounge guests, unless you've got first-class credentials. Oh wait. His eyes dropped to her bag on the floor, not her face. I am first class, she said, her voice low and firm. Then you should already be in the lounge, he replied with a smirk. Maybe check the economy side. She stared at him. I've had enough of this. So have we, he muttered, then turned away. She clenched her jaw, stormed toward the boarding counter, and flagged down the youngest employee, the only one who hadn't joined in the earlier mockery. I need to get a message out. Now. The girl hesitated, glanced around, then leaned in. We're not supposed to let anyone access our system. There's a block on external networks in this wing. Something about containment measures. Containment of what? Niall asked. The girl shook her head. They said, potential digital threats. But no one's explained it clearly. They just said to keep people quiet. So now truth is a threat. Niall murmured. She stepped away, back to her seat, and tried once more. Still no signal. Her fingers moved fast, activating her secure offline notes app. She began typing every detail, time-stamping everything. Assault, defamation, surveillance interference. She documented the voices, uniforms, room locations, every word, every action. Then she locked the file behind her biometric signature and slipped the phone back into her coat. She didn't notice the janitor behind her. He wasn't cleaning. He didn't carry a mop or gloves or a cart. He walked with a radio clipped to his belt, but no badge. He passed close, too close, and in one fluid motion, bent like he was picking up trash, snatched her phone from the seat beside her and dropped it into a black maintenance bag. She turned instinctively, sensing something wrong, but he was already walking away, blending with the flow of airport staff. Hey, she called. But no one turned. She rushed toward the gate camera tower, red light blinking. She pressed the call button. No response. Camera logs, she said aloud, already fearing what she confirmed. This area is under live surveillance. But the terminal screen behind her flickered once, then went dark. A second later, the camera light cut off. Back in the control room, a man in a gray suit with no name tag watched the feed disappear. Wipe the last 30 minutes, he said into his headset, and pull the plug on that badge ID. She's not in the system anymore. Niall stood motionless at the now dead screen. Her phone was gone. The cameras were off. The Wi-Fi was restricted. The signal jammed. Her voice cut. She turned, scanning the gate area. The whisper campaign was still working. Eyes avoided her now. She wasn't a doctor anymore. She wasn't a traveler. She was a problem, a risk, a silhouette standing too tall in a room designed to shrink people like her. But Niall didn't flinch. She walked slowly back to her seat, sat down with deliberate calm, and stared at the horizon beyond the glass. Planes took off every 5 minutes, none of them knowing what war was being waged in the shadows of Gate C-17. Everything they tried to erase, her voice, her records, her image, they did so believing she was alone, that she had no allies, that she would eventually disappear like so many others who had been quietly buried under bureaucratic stone. But Niall Rhodes had never relied on the permission of institutions to exist, and she certainly didn't build a multi-million-dollar surgical empire by playing silent in the face of injustice. 10 minutes after her phone vanished, 10 minutes after they shut down the surveillance and erased her logs, a single figure appeared at the edge of the gate corridor, walking with measured grace and cold authority. She was a silver-haired woman in a sharply cut charcoal suit, wearing no airport credentials, no badges, no name tags, because she didn't need any. Her presence alone parted the sea of uniforms and whispers. Her name was Evelyn Merrick, and for the last 20 years, she had served as General Counsel and Crisis Director for Western Hill International. She walked straight through the terminal without being stopped because she had already made the necessary calls. Calls that had reached the Federal Aviation Security Directorate. Calls that had triggered an emergency override code red protocol. And now she was here. She leaned down to the lead security supervisor standing at the control kiosk, whose smug expression melted the second she said, barely above a whisper, "You're currently detaining Dr. Niall Rhodes, the founder and current CEO of Western Hill Surgical Institute. You're holding a federally recognized medical diplomat under false security pretenses. You have exactly 20 seconds to correct that mistake before the DOJ gets involved." The color drained from the man's face. He opened his mouth to object, But she cut him off with a simple gesture, 2 fingers pressed to a Bluetooth earpiece, signaling she wasn't alone. "We already sent over a list of names of everyone involved in the incident," she added, her voice ice smooth. "If I were you, I'd start pulling your personnel out of that gate area before they end up indicted on a federal civil rights violation." Simultaneously, 2 agents in black suits emerged from a service corridor behind Gate C. They weren't TSA. They weren't airport security. They moved with military precision, federal clearance badges clipped to their jackets, earpieces flashing, jaws clenched. They didn't ask questions. They gave orders. "Stand down," one said, addressing the TSA team directly. "Effective immediately, custody of this passenger is being transferred to federal executive protection." "Who authorized this?" a gate officer barked, trying to reassert control. The agent didn't even blink. "Office of Aviation Integrity. Order issued directly from Director Halverson. You've made a mistake. We're here to clean it up before it becomes national." The room turned cold. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Niele stood slowly as one of the agents approached her, not with force, not with suspicion, but with open respect. "Dr. Rhodes," he said, addressing her with a formal nod. "We're here to escort you to a secure lounge. Your team is waiting. Is there anything you need before we leave this area?" She studied his face, then Evelyn's behind him. She nodded once. "Yes," she said, eyes sharp as steel. "I need a list of every person who touched my records, my name, or my body in the last 2 hours. And I need their full names." "Already compiled," Evelyn replied smoothly, lifting a file folder. "Also," Niele added as she looked toward the terminal camera, miraculously reactivated, now blinking red again, "I'd like a copy of the footage. Starting from the moment I passed security, including the part where I was shoved into a wall by someone who called himself a protector of the public." "Done," Evelyn said. The lead guard stammered behind her. "We didn't, it was a misunderstanding." "No," Niele interrupted, turning toward him now for the first time. "It was a pattern. One you've repeated your whole career, I'm guessing. But this time, you chose the wrong name." The agents formed a protective flank around her as they walked. The same passengers who had once stared with judgment now watched with confusion, even awe. Some took video. Others simply moved aside. No one stopped her now. The whispers had changed tones, from suspicion to apology, from doubt to reverence. She passed the officer who had mocked her badge earlier. He stared at the floor. "Dr. Rhodes," one of the passengers said quietly. I'm sorry." She didn't stop. She didn't nod. She simply kept walking, coat over her arm, steps sure, and even back straight. It no longer stank of quiet cruelty and condescension. Now, it carried the sterile precision of federal order. The lounge door opened with a soft beep, revealing a space built for dignitaries. Leather seating, frosted glass walls, silent attendants standing in dark suits, and a steel-encased communications center in the corner. Niele stepped inside, her stride calm but unwavering, and without hesitation, she walked to the secure line mounted in the wall. She picked up the receiver, entered a short 6-digit code, and waited only a moment before a voice answered. "Yes," she said softly but firmly, "it's time. Activate full protocol. I want legal media and PR in position within the next 10 minutes. Use the emergency brief. This is no longer private." The voice confirmed and disconnected. She hung up the line and turned to Evelyn, who was already opening her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she pulled up security reports, names, timestamps, and archived footage from their own digital backups. "We lost 26 minutes of airport surveillance," Evelyn said without looking up, "but our remote capture from your glasses and coat mic picked up everything." Niele gave a single nod. "Send the raw footage to Roland. No edits, no filters. I want it on our press wire before I take my next breath." "Done," Evelyn replied. In the next room, one of the agents received a discreet ping on his tablet. "It's live," he said. WNS picked it up first. Now AP Reuters. And even the Post are mirroring the stream. In less than 3 minutes, the entire situation was no longer under wraps. The world now had eyes. The video began with Niel at the TSA checkpoint, being pulled aside despite a clean scan. It showed the pat-down, the comment about her hair, the mockery from the staff. Then it shifted to the security office, the dim room, the forced silence, the attempt to isolate her voice from reaching anyone. Finally, it captured the violence at the gate, the baton officer, the false accusations over the loudspeaker, the shove into the wall, and the crowd that turned to judgment before it knew the truth. But now they knew, and Niel wasn't a name anymore. She was a headline. The video went viral within minutes. Comments flooded in. Celebrities reposted the clip with the hashtag Dr. Rhodes. Civil rights lawyers began issuing statements. Members of Congress started tagging federal oversight agencies. News vans rerouted. Flights were delayed, not by storms, but by the storm of accountability. The terminal buzzed again, but now it was different. No more whispering. No more muttering. The passengers looked at their phones, stunned, embarrassed. They recognized her face. They realized they had seen the moment unfold and done nothing. Evelyn turned her screen toward Niel. "Would you like to make a statement or let the press office handle it?" Niel paused, then shook her head. "No, I'll speak myself." Evelyn opened a live broadcast window. The camera blinked red. Niel stood before it, back straight, voice steady. "This morning I was detained, assaulted, and humiliated for the crime of buying a first-class ticket while black. I was accused of fraud, stripped of my dignity, and silenced. Until now. My name is Dr. Niel Rhodes. I'm a surgeon and executive, and a woman who built a hospital not from wealth, but from perseverance. What happened today wasn't an isolated error. It was a system doing what it was built to do, diminish voices that threaten its comfort. But today it failed, and tomorrow it will answer for that." The feed cut cleanly. Evelyn smiled faintly. 100,000 views in the first 2 minutes. Outside the lounge, chaos simmered. The airline CEO, alerted mid-flight, called an emergency board session. The head of airport security was relieved of duty on the spot. The TSA regional manager received a formal federal inquiry notice by email. Agents with badges that outranked uniforms began collecting names and files. Inside the terminal, the officer who had shoved Niel into the wall tried to exit quietly through a side door, only to be intercepted by federal enforcement. Shareholders panicked. Emergency meetings were held in boardrooms across 3 time zones. Stocks dipped nearly 6% by late afternoon, and the airline's legal division was already preparing statements for what they couldn't spin, deny, or delete. But no press release could erase the image of a respected black doctor shoved into a wall by someone paid to protect her. No soundbite could soften the accusation of stolen credit cards broadcast over a public intercom. And no scripted apology could undo what the world had now seen with its own eyes. By 6 p.m., 3 senior executives within the airline were suspended pending investigation. The regional airport director issued a hasty resignation, and the head of airport security was escorted out of his own building, quietly, to avoid more cameras. But it was too late. The cameras were already rolling. A class action suit was announced within 12 hours, with over 200 past passengers coming forward, sharing eerily similar stories of humiliation, profiling, and random screenings that weren't random at all. Niel's case became the lightning rod, but the strike revealed a deep fault line that had always existed beneath the surface. The Department of Transportation launched a federal investigation under civil rights statutes, and the Secretary of Transportation made a rare primetime statement, calling the video a clear example of institutional profiling and abuse of power that warrants not only internal discipline, but structural reform. Across the country, airport staff began whispering her name, not in mockery, but in reverence. Dr. Rhodes wasn't just a woman who had stood her ground. She was a symbol of what happened when silence met strategy, when survival evolved into retribution. At Western Hill, Niel's staff gathered in the main auditorium, watching the live coverage. Nurses wept. Surgeons stood in stunned silence. Some of them had heard her stories before, had seen the subtle bruises racism left on her career. But now, the world had witnessed it too, and none of them would ever be able to forget it. One by one, hospitals and clinics around the nation released official letters of support, aligning themselves with her cause, pledging anti-bias audits, demanding protections for healthcare professionals of color, and recognizing what had happened as an attack not just on a person, but on a principle. Meanwhile, the officer who had shoved her, whose baton had become the centerpiece of every televised replay, faced criminal assault charges. His personnel record, once sealed, was now under scrutiny, revealing a decade-long pattern of excessive force complaints, all previously dismissed, all now reopened. His name, once just another line in a spreadsheet, now sat beside words like suspension, indictment, and internal affairs. He lawyered up, but the damage had already metastasized. The woman who had mocked Niel's credentials on camera was identified by name within 24 hours, and her private group chat messages, screenshotted and leaked by a colleague disgusted by the behavior, showed a long thread of racial slurs, jokes about affirmative action doctors, and selfies with passengers captioned, "Bet this one needs Google Maps to find the plane." She was fired before sunrise. Her name trended next, not in admiration, but in infamy. Evelyn Merrick, working behind the scenes like a conductor of consequences, made sure every legal document was airtight, every statement evidence-based, and every perpetrator left with no exit except resignation or litigation. "You see," she told Niel in a quiet moment between interviews, "you didn't just make them see you, you made them see themselves." News networks ran continuous coverage. Morning shows debated policy changes. Airline executives were summoned before congressional subcommittees. Weeks passed, but the storm didn't fade, it evolved. Investigations turned into policies, temporary suspensions into lifetime bans, and public outrage into a national reckoning. But as the dust began to settle, something unexpected rose from the aftermath. Not just justice, but reflection. Niel stood before a packed federal hearing room. The same woman who had once been silenced by scanners and batons, now requested by senators, civil rights leaders, and educators to testify, not about what had happened to her, but about what needed to happen next. Cameras lined the chamber. Behind her sat Evelyn, her team of attorneys, and members of her hospital board. But Niel didn't speak like a victim. She didn't wear vengeance on her sleeve. Instead, she spoke with calm clarity, her words not aimed at punishment, but at change. She recounted the humiliation, the physical assault, the intentional isolation, but she ended with something no one expected: grace. "Systems break people," she said, looking not at the panel, but directly at the security officer seated behind the witness table, the man who had once shoved her against a wall like she was nothing. But people can choose to break cycles. He had been subpoenaed to testify, but when Niel's voice filled the room, he couldn't meet her eyes. He was no longer in uniform. His jaw was clean-shaven. His hands trembled on the table. And then, in a moment that surprised everyone, he stood, turned toward her, and spoke. "I was wrong," he said, voice raw, cracking under the weight of shame. "I've worked in security for over 2 decades. I thought I was protecting people. But I see now that what I was really protecting was the comfort of those who looked like me, and the systems built to serve them." His eyes filled with tears. "I never saw people like you as equals. Not because you weren't, but because I was too afraid to admit you were." The room was silent, not with tension, but reverence. Even Evelyn blinked. Niel stepped down from the podium and walked toward him, not with anger, not with pity, but with purpose. She offered her hand. "If you're ready to relearn," she said softly, "then I'll make sure you have the tools." That same day, Niel held a press conference not outside a courtroom, but in front of Western Hills Education Center. She announced the launch of Relearn Humanity, a national training initiative designed to unteach bias and retrain professionals in fields where judgment could mean dignity or disaster. It would begin with aviation, security, and public service, then expand to healthcare, education, and media. "This isn't about revenge," she told the reporters. "It's about recalibration. We don't need to burn systems to the ground. We need to rebuild them with better bricks." The program would be funded with the settlement money. She had refused personal compensation. Instead, every dollar won from the lawsuits went into scholarships, retraining centers, and anti-bias education programs across 20 states. And the first recipients? The employees involved in her case. Those who accepted accountability. Those who wanted to change. The man who once questioned her degree sat in the front row of the first class, beside the woman who had mocked her credentials in a chat thread. They didn't speak at first, but they listened. And listening was the first thing they had never done. Slowly, a shift began. Across airports, new policies were implemented. Cameras now had third-party access lines. Racial bias audits became mandatory. Random checks were reviewed by federal observers. At Western Hill, Niele expanded her mission, launching a think tank on equity in institutional design. She turned pain into purpose, not with fury, but with infrastructure. And somewhere in a quiet office, a former guard drafted a letter of thanks, not for being forgiven, but for being challenged. Not many people get to rewrite their story. Fewer still get to rewrite the story of others. But Niele Rhodes did both, not because they let her, but because she never stopped being who she was, even when the world tried to erase her. Now, when passengers pass through O'Hare Terminal C, a plaque hangs near the checkpoint. It reads, "Dedicated to Dr. Niele Rhodes," who reminded us that dignity is not assigned by position, but upheld by principle. It doesn't erase what happened, but it ensures it is never forgotten. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. What part hit you the hardest? Was it the moment Niele stood her ground, or when the system finally fell apart? Drop a comment and let us know what you think. And tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your voice matters. Let's talk about justice, change, and what real courage looks like.